The Civil Rights Movement. Introduction. The Civil Rights Movement, 1954 to 1968, was a mass social and political movement aimed at dismantling institutionalized racism, segregation, and discrimination against African Americans in the United States. It fundamentally reshaped the nation's legal and social landscape, securing significant legislative victories and inspiring global movements for justice and equality. Historical background. After the Civil War, the Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877, saw progress for African Americans, with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments abolishing slavery, granting citizenship, and securing voting rights. However, the end of Reconstruction allowed Southern states to implement Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation and disenfranchisement. Conditions before the movement. 1. Segregation. Public spaces like schools, transportation, and restaurants were divided by race. 2. Disenfranchisement. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation kept African Americans from voting. 3. Violence and intimidation. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan terrorized black communities. The 20th century saw the rise of organizations like the NAACP, 1909, which laid the groundwork for challenging these injustices through legal action. Key events and turning points. Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. 1. Landmark Supreme Court case that overturned Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896. 2. Ruling. Segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. 3. Impact. Energized activists but faced backlash, such as massive resistance, in southern states. Montgomery bus boycott, 1955-1956. 1. Trigger. Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. 2. Leaders. Martin Luther King Jr., E.D. Nixon, Joe Ann Robinson. 3. Outcome. Supreme Court ruled bus segregation unconstitutional after 381 days of protest. Little Rock 9, 1957. 1. Event. 9 African American students integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. 2. Opposition. Governor Orville Faubus deployed the National Guard to block entry. 3. Federal intervention. President Eisenhower sent federal troops to enforce integration. Sit-ins, 1960. 1. Start. Greensboro, North Carolina, where 4 students refused to leave a segregated lunch counter. 2. Spread. Inspired similar protests nationwide. 3. Impact. Woolworths and other establishments desegregated their counters. Freedom Rides, 1961. 1. Purpose. Challenge segregation in interstate bus terminals. 2. Opposition. Riders faced beatings and arrests, particularly in Alabama. 3. Outcome. Federal Interstate Commerce Commission enforced desegregation laws. Birmingham Campaign, 1963. 1. Goal. Desegregate public facilities in Birmingham, Alabama. 2. Tactics. Sit-ins, boycotts, and marches. 3. Key moment. Police Commissioner Bull Connor used fire hoses and dogs on protesters, sparking national outrage. March on Washington, 1963. 1. Attendance. Over 250,000 participants. 2. Highlight. Martin Luther King Jr. 2. I Have a Dream, speech. 3. Purpose. Advocate for civil rights legislation and economic justice. Civil Rights Act of 1964. 1. Signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. 2. Key provisions. Banned discrimination in public accommodations. Prohibited employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Strengthened enforcement of school desegregation. Selma to Montgomery March, 1965. 1. Cuz. Push for voting rights after persistent disenfranchisement. 2. Bloody Sunday. Peaceful protesters were brutally attacked by police on Edmund Pettus Bridge. 3. Outcome. Led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, banning discriminatory voting practices. Key figures. Martin Luther King Jr. 1. Advocate of nonviolent resistance, inspired by Gandhi. 2. Key campaigns. Montgomery bus boycott, Birmingham campaign, March on Washington. 3. Assassinated in 1968, marking the end of the movement's peak. Rosa Parks. 1. Known as the mother of the civil rights movement. 2. Her refusal to give up her bus seat symbolized resistance to injustice. Malcolm X. 1. Promoted black nationalism and self-defense. 2. Advocated for African American empowerment through organizations like the Nation of Islam. John Lewis. 1. Leader in the Freedom Rides and Selma marches. 2. Later served as a U.S. congressman, continuing his fight for justice. Thurgood Marshall. 1. NAACP lawyer who argued Brown versus Board of Education. 2. First African American Supreme Court Justice. Challenges and resistance violence. 1. Bombings. Birmingham church bombing, 1963, killed 4 young girls. 2. Murders. Activists like Medgar Evers and Freedom Summer workers were assassinated. White resistance. 1. Southern states used legislative and violent means to resist integration. 2. Massive resistance movements closed schools rather than integrate. Legacy and impact legislative achievements. 1. Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended segregation and discrimination. 2. Voting Rights Act of 1965 protected African Americans' right to vote. Cultural change. 1. Inspired movements like women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and disability rights. 2. Shifted global perspectives on human rights and equality. Continued struggles. 1. Modern movements like Black Lives Matter highlight ongoing racial disparities in policing, housing, and education. Conclusion: the civil rights movement was a transformative chapter in U.S. history, demonstrating the power of grassroots activism, legal reform, and nonviolent resistance. While it dismantled many aspects of institutionalized racism, it also emphasized that the fight for justice is ongoing.